Welcome to the Deep Dive, the advanced web development podcast brought to you by indep.dev. Hi everyone, welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're discussing reactivity in application frameworks, and I have two guests joining me today. First one is the creator of the SolidJS framework. He's originally from Canada, but he recently moved to California to join eBay to work on their Marko.js framework. A fun fact about our guest, he dropped out of college at an age of 18 to become a punk rocker, and he stayed there for 10 years before coming back to take an education. And actually, SolidJS is named after his tattoo from his punk rock band. So please welcome Ryan Carniato.
Great.
Thank you. It's a good intro.
Flowers.
Anything to add?
I don't know. My username is based off that too. Ryan Solid. That was the whole thing. Like everybody in the band, that was their last name, and that's just kind of. I was like really uninspired, I guess, when I was trying to name my library. I couldn't come up with anything.
Nice. Okay. Well, welcome to the show. Our second guest is Ukrainian. He has 8 years of front-end experience. He's been working 2 years on his startup. He's the creator of ThinkRx.io, a reactive playground with marble diagrams. He's the creator of the framework called Recks, or RX. It's spelled RECKS. It's a JSX supporting framework with args observables as first-class citizens. Very interesting. He also did another library called react-rxjs-elements, and that adds observable support to React.js. A fun fact, he went hiking to climb the highest mountain in Ukraine, and he was very happy when he met some tea salesmen on the top. So, welcome, Kos. Welcome, Kos Palchyk. Is that somewhat correct of pronouncing your name?
Sorry.
Kos Palchyk?
Yeah.
Okay, it's about right. Kos, you have to tell us about that story of hiking to climb the highest mountain.
Yeah, because everyone here on Earth have different jobs, and when I went hiking on the highest mountain in Ukraine, it took me 3.5 hours to get to the top, and it was very exhausting, and I was very tired. And when I got to the top, I saw two salesmen selling hot tea there. So they got some water, some gas to fire that, and they were selling that on the top, and I was very happy to meet them. It was some kind of daunting for my achievement, but I was really glad to see them, and I had a good time drinking that tea.
That's not easy. They would have had they hauled the water up the mountain with them as well, right?
Yeah. They have some gas balance. How to say that? So they are. I think they're carrying several kilograms up the hill, and I think they're doing that in the season almost daily. So that's hard work.
Wow.
But and the prices are not that high, so it was bearable to buy a couple of cups. Yeah.
What a job.
Yeah.
Okay, so we brought you here today to discuss kind of the state of reactivity in application frameworks, the recent trends, and how you see the different frameworks and the thoughts of your own frameworks. What were your ideas behind them and working on them and improving them and so on. And who would like to go first to introduce their framework?
Sure. I'll go first. Why not? You introduced me first, so I'll go first. The Solid framework. it was actually, sometimes I feel like I've been caught in a time warp when talking to people about this stuff. A lot of the ideas were things that were present around the 2010, 2011 period of JavaScript. I was a big time Knockout.js developer.
Oh,
so,
me too.
and you know, I had been building. I was actually in a startup, so we didn't really have much leeway to change stuff, and we were on Knockout for years. And over time, I'd watched it kind of, be less prominent, and React come in the scene, and all these other things. And I liked the fundamental idea behind it so much. It kind of rejuvenated me after years of, I'd spent years in the early to mid 2000s doing .NET programming on the server, and that their kind of isomorphic model, and just to come back to plain JavaScript and have things just kind of work was amazing to me. So as Knockout started kind of fading and other similar libraries kind of falling out of favor, I'm like, no, there's something really good here. Why can't we just figure out how to put it together? And I was kind of on a mission, honestly, since about 2014 to try and figure out how I could kind of recapture that experience in a more modern dev setting. Almost within a year of seeing React, I'm like we can do more, we can do better. And yeah, I mean, this kind of new ground in me, mostly by myself. So it's just kind of an experiment outside of work hours to hopefully replace the library that we used at work. Fortunately, I wasn't really ready yet when we got around to replacing it at work. That company now uses React, but yeah, and to be fair, I was actually the dev lead manager, like the guy who ultimately got to make the decision. And I talked to the guys, and they weren't quite ready to kind of support our own libraries again. It was actually the how should I say, like the culture of the company, which made me want to experiment and try stuff. Because the guy who actually hired me was responsible for Knockback, which was a backbone knockout library, and just that kind of culture of building your stuff on the open source kind of got me into it. And Solid is just kind of like a lot of experiments and learning lessons from working with Knockout in production for years and years. And that's why there's some opinionated stuff, but yet at the same time having a huge admiration for React behind the scenes after teaching many junior devs things and learning lots of foot guns and ways you can kind of mess yourself up if you're not careful with reactive systems. So that sounds like mostly negative, but the truth of the matter is I just knew that there was something there, and I kept on tweaking it and getting inspiration from other libraries until I found something that ended up being fairly performant and gave the developer experience I was looking for. In general, I haven't said even what SolidJS is, so maybe I should just give you a little bit there. But it's a automatic dependency tracking reactive system similar to Knockout.js in that it basically tracks reactive access of variables inside computational closures, which means that as the end user, Vue uses a similar system and MobX is similar. You don't always think about the dependencies. You just write the code as you would want it to execute, and then it just every time any of those variables update, it will automatically update. And that's basically the gist behind it. I've taken that approach to the extreme. So when you render your views, we have the ability to individually update parts of the view rather than fall back to a virtual DOM like you see with MobX or Vue, which even though it has that ability to auto track, still ends up virtually re-rendering large parts in the DOM tree. Where Solid kind of focuses on reducing the size of what needs to be executed when changes happen, and
very cool.
Yeah, and because of using compiler on the JSX, we're able to optimize out the other classic weakness of the reactive library, which is the initial setup. So kind of get fast updates and fast creation.
Does Solid come with its own compiler?
Yeah, that's the thing. The JSX compilation is very specific. I'd say almost like Svelte-like, where while there's a lot of flexibility and the ability to just inject arbitrary JavaScript expressions because it's JSX, it's very essential to handle the expressions and especially the creation of DOM nodes to use this compiler because it knows ahead how to walk the DOM tree and insert everything where it needs to. This work only has to happen once because with Reactive, it's just set it up and let it play kind of scenario. But it's a big part of the performance because instead of asking at runtime, hey, what's this input? What's this? Like in every single scenario, how is it structured? We're able to just focus on the dynamic holes in a static template at runtime and structure the whole thing up front. So this makes creation, like when you initially render the page, really fast.
It's very cool.
And this took how many years to build?
and how your idea changed? So from that initial knockout.
I mean, it took, as I said, it took several years. I started experimenting in 2014-15 time period. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say that I really put as much of an effort till about 2016, and then it took about 2 years between 2016 and 2018 before I was comfortable open sourcing it and actually putting it out there. But my initial ideas were all over the map. You have to imagine, I was using, my own, before JSX, I was using my own template language and context very to knockout, right? I just wanted to, at first, I wanted to fix the one problem I had with knockout, which was that it actually it walked the live DOM tree to attach stuff because the bindings were strings right in the DOM tree. To be fair, that makes it really good for those scenarios where people just want to incrementally upgrade to it. So if they render something on the server and knockouts in the strings, it'll execute only on the client. But I went through that. I also was very standards driven. When I started this, I was like, okay, I want web components. And around 2015-16, the proposal showed up that they were going to do something very similar to RxJS observables. At first it was object.observe, but then RxJS observables, they were basically, there's an observable proposal, and I was like, okay, I need to do, I need to use observables, I need to use web components, I need to use, proxies were obviously a thing of interest as well, and I ended up using proxies in the end, but, there's lots of different stuff, and then, I just, as I played with stuff, kind of worked on the experience I wanted, traded back and forth, there's so many considerations when you're building a library like that, and in the end, I feel like I found a place where there's a strong identity, philosophically too, even, but it's definitely different than a lot of other what I call finer grain reactive libraries like the Vue and some MobX in the world, where they put the highest value on the automatic tracking, so they have the ability to make things easy. And at one point that magic was considered dangerous. I guess Svelte falls in that category too. I actually thought the biggest value wasn't necessarily the easiness, but I was actually trying to look at say performance and control and the ability to kind of model any problem. What's wonderful about reactivity is it's not necessarily like a virtual DOM, which is this is a solution for a specific problem. It's just a series of patterns, a way to model a problem. It's just kind of like having this event driven thing, which obviously comes up a lot in UI, but you can really model most other systems using a reactive system of some kind. You could put a virtual DOM in a reactive system and do the diffing in there. So, that was the appeal for me. So that kind of kept things very open when I was approaching this problem, right? So I have a lot of some people consider interesting opinions about this stuff because I actually, use a lot of things that are similar to React developers, and JSX actually ended up being a natural extension because of that. Because, for example, this is less a surprise to someone who works on RxJS, but immutability and directional flow. These are things that RxJS do very well, and it keeps things controlled and well understood. I want it to have that same kind of control in these kind of auto tracking dependency systems. So, explicit setters, read-write segregation, all these kind of things that weren't there back in 2012. I felt personally that a lot of the reason those libraries are hard to debug, hard to maintain, and the reason they fell out of favor ultimately were a lot of, this is magic. I don't see what's going on. It's chaotic. I wanted to remove that chaos and take what I'd learned from React and RxJS to kind of do that, which, as I said, it makes Solid while it's very similar to Vue in some ways, almost philosophical opposites.
Right. I have many questions, but first I'd like to hear about Recks. Or maybe which one came first? Was it react-rxjs-elements or the Recks framework?
So actually my startup, first of all, Ryan, it was very, very cool history. And I think the name Solid reflects the approach you took. It was with web components and all the standards. That's a very cool and great work there. Regarding the Recks, Lars, you did the lengthy introduction of my libraries, but I actually built Recks in like 2 weeks, and it was based on.
Was your name Brendan Eich?
Sorry?
Is your name Brendan Eich?
I couldn't challenge Eich. He's much superior. I had an idea, and that's something I used in the startup, that the view is you can actually live inside the Rx streams, so Rx stream can define the updates. So I had the idea, but I saw a online challenge. It was a competition from Telegram, the messaging system. They published a competition to write a online messenger using your own framework. And I thought to myself, hey, this is a chance to implement my idea, and I have to use it. And I should say that I lost the competition, but the framework, the very beta version, was born there. And the idea is quite simple. Again, it's a component defines some stream that just gives you view updates. That's it. So you're actually in control of how fast and when, and depending on what your components update. Again, that the initial work was done in 7 days, I think, and after that I had just minor updates there. I should warn everyone that it's not production ready. There are a lot of things to update, but it's very flexible now, and I think there will be a further interaction. The current version is 0.0.13, so the API will be changed and will improve to developer needs. That's the short intro.
Okay, and the other one is kind of a similar thing for React. At least it looks similar. I think half a year after, I'm working on a project that uses React actually, and React Observable. It's a Redux Observable. That's an extension for Redux to do effects, synchronous effects. Right.
So that's not the best experience with all the actions given a full circle to the storage just to use Recks features. So I thought that I could borrow the idea of Recks and introduce it to React ecosystem, and I've created just a simple React fragment that accepts an observable or several observables as children, subscribes to them, and just outputs the results in place. So yeah, it's quite simple, but it enables this dynamic view, so you can again define your view using observables.
Yeah, very interesting. I've been tweeting a little about it as
Yeah,
things comes up in conversations, and people seem to be very amazed, as am I. It's a very interesting project.
It's just a bit different approach to defining updatable view, I think. But
No, that's really cool. I mean, you're almost kind of forced with the popular libraries like React to actually like kind of get your hand in there. And I have to admit, I haven't actually seen much work with like RX style observables, right? Which is in that space in the actual React views. You've seen it obviously in Redux, but I could definitely see the ability to extend that from Redux all the way through to make a consistent system. You almost have this like meta system on top of it probably that works quite well. Kind of like with MobX on the more fine-grained reactivity side. I actually made something similar for Solid, and then I was just like, why am I even in the space? Because MobX pretty much owns it. But on the RxJS side, that's really interesting. I'm pretty stoked that there's actually an option there to kind of give that form of reactivity throughout the app. That's really cool.
Yeah, with Recks, it was a free land, you can experiment whatever you want. But with React, it's a subject I wanted to talk more about. But I think that React is kind of resistant to Recks ideology. It pushes it back. So there are frameworks that are more natural to reactivity and some there. Yes.
I mean, I don't know how far we should take this at the moment, but I actually think that the moves that React has been making recently actually make it less friendly to reactive libraries.
Definitely,
and people don't really see that right off the surface of it, because part of it's because React looks more these days like certain reactive libraries, and its primitives, use of hooks and whatnot, and I think that kind of comes from the more they go functional, and the more that you see those kind of patterns, those are kind of the basis for a lot of reactive programming. These kind of functional programming mechanisms of composition through functions and all that stuff. And since React has its own completely separate update model that is very different than the reactive ones, less granular and whatnot. When you simplify the API surface, to have this sort of similar API but functions a little different, it gets really weird trying to introduce things that look kind of similar at times and have them function differently. And even like libraries like MobX in the React hooks world have had to come up with completely, I won't say had to, but it made sense for them to come up with completely different ways to handle the stores and structure their stuff in React land. And I think you're going to see more and more React like third-party libraries leverage their new like exposure of the update system and hooks in such a way that the reactive libraries might find themselves kind of the odd man out, whereas before React actually was sort of less opinionated, and you could kind of shoehorn anything in for better or for worse. As I said, early days React, actually, I thought that was a weakness, because I was like, when you deal with something knockout, you're like, oh, I know what I'm dealing with. There's a way to handle data, like React never pushed that on you other than, immutable state changes. But now with hooks and context and the way that they're kind of approaching it, it's not necessarily like in all cases the best way to do stuff, but people are coming up with solutions based on that, that will always perform better or be closer to React's vision because they're using the tools React gave them. And I think that makes it more challenging for reactive libraries which like to take control of the situation.
To tweak it, yeah.
So it's interesting, at least
I guess maybe the latest example of that is recoil. And I know you wrote an article that mentioned that. So maybe you could explain how that's related to what you just said.
Yeah, because recoil is not reactive in any sense, but it uses functional programming techniques like lenses, which, this whole idea of getting kind of granular updates off a top-down kind of pushed model. And to be fair, streams are kind of, reactive streams are kind of a bit like the way they execute and you do the transformation. You can do the same sort of transformation concept with recoil, except it's not tied to, an arbitrary driver. It's not like an operator. It's tied to React's actual inbuilt reactive system. So while recoil on a performance side, still, they're adding features and they're figuring out how to do better memoization stuff. The main concept of it gives it almost the same kind of update granularity that classical libraries like MobX have been giving React. The ability to basically have like a large data store kind of outside of the component, and then have updates feed into the single store and then propagate out. That's like Redux, but actually have the ability through these pre-made lenses, to focus down on a specific state. Right. And basically only the components that rely on that state actually update. That same kind of ability to kind of memoize everything down and only update when needs to be updated, like the kind of idealized one-for-one update component thing, where if a component doesn't use a state in between like the parent, which does, and like some child down, there's ability to almost automatically not re-render parts of the tree. And that is something which, people have wanted from the React side, and MobX, has a solution for it. But now with recoil, you're actually using React's own update cycle. And in theory, as I said, I didn't get too far with benchmarking because there's a couple features they hadn't implemented yet. This should give, as close to native React performance as possible. The thing is, when you're building a library for React or, benchmarking React performance, React itself is the fastest or most performant you can get, because everything has to go through that virtual DOM renderer. You can do some smart things to try and reduce work, sort of, but anything you can do with a reactive library, you can do without a reactive library. So like in terms of update cycles. So React by itself will always be the fastest version of React. So, adding anything on top of it will slow React down a bit, but you do it for convenience and for, good developer experience. Something like recoil, in theory, when it gets all the pieces together, right, has the ability to sit very close to that React layer and offer almost minimal overhead while providing a lot of the same benefits people find from reactive systems in React. Yeah.
Now that you mentioned benchmarks, I know that you're big on the framework benchmark, or it's called something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, the JS framework benchmark. It's one of my favorites. I've been looking at benchmarks since the beginning, because when React kind of came on the scene, there was some good stuff fundamentally about like Flux and unidirectional flow and stuff, and I prescribed by that completely. But it was actually some of those early benchmarks that I felt started nailing the coffin, and I thought they were misleading at the beginning of the time. Basically, we started down this path where everything, benchmarks around 2014-15 were all based on data snapshots, which are giant blobs from the server. So picture a scenario like a stock ticker, or it's the best way I can think of, where you get the whole page's data, and then a second later you get the whole page's data again, and then you get the whole page's data again. You can't solve that well without diffing. So they'd be like, they pull out Ember and React and Knockout and Angular, and basically the guys who didn't use heavy diffing, so like Ember and Knockout, would just get toasted. The implementations people wrote were too naive. I mean, it's possible to solve it, but very complicated with the tools given. And React would be like, yeah, look, I'm 10 times faster. And I was like, okay, let's see how fast you can animate the circle on the screen. And the reactive libraries, on the other hand, were just like 100 times faster than React. But those weren't the ones getting talked at talks and that. So I started, really getting to benchmark right from the beginning because I wanted to see if I can make reactive libraries outperform React in every single benchmark. I mean, that I could find. And because I knew it was definitely possible. And one thing that drew me to this JS framework benchmark is probably, in my opinion, the most. I mean, benchmarks are all should be suspected. Like they are not perfect. These are made up situations. But out of them, I'm not going to say it's any less suspect per se, but it tests a lot of common in-app situations that involve user input, which is, it's more than just the initial render. It's more than just trying to do this diffing in a large scale, which I don't know always happens in apps. There's places where this diffing matters, but it's not like you're always trying to re-render your whole page every time someone clicks a button. The JS framework benchmark is it's like taking to-do MVC. It's taking that simple kind of, here's a table, here's some rows, kind of scenario, remove a row, select a row, kind of thing, and it's measuring them. And the author of that framework spent a lot of time trying to come up with the most accurate ways to measure timelines. And this is across frameworks that use different update cycles, promises, all this stuff, and he's managed to figure out a way fairly reasonably accurately to compare every library, whether they're, reactive or VDOM or some kind of DOM reconciling approach, in a place where, it's not 100% even, but very close to a even playing ground. You obviously should take any test that involves rendering 10,000 rows to a page, under a bit of suspicion, just simply the fact that you're not doing that exactly. And there's still ways to get around it. But by and large, it's probably the best way to, initially test the performance of your library and also kind of get an idea of, basic things like how performant rendering is or updates are. It also looks at size. It looks at script load time, memory usage, things like that. And I use that framework to tune every piece of Solid. I use a few other ones as well, but almost every JS framework is on there, right? There's like 100 frameworks or something, and it's probably the best proving grounds, and it really, really helped me, tweak and tweak and tweak until I got Solid to the front of the list, right? That's pretty much.
Yeah, I was about to ask who's leading the pack.
Yeah, I mean, the front is so tight that any other day, someone's going to kind of jump on different runs. Like, there's enough variance in the runs, especially as computers have been getting faster. Like, the tests, the official tests are run on the author's computer, which takes a lot of time. And I always commend his dedication to keep on merging all these PRs to kind of keep it running.
So there's an official benchmark computer to make it fair?
Yes, yeah, and he upgraded it about a year ago. Okay. That's so all the results are unified, right? And he upgraded about a year ago, and when his computer or maybe it's a little longer, but when his computer upgraded, suddenly like a bunch of the libraries did better, because it's like the libraries that are closer to the vanilla JS did better. It actually, stuff like the middle tier frameworks actually stayed about the same proportion, but the gap between just like writing plain JavaScript and writing a framework got closer and closer. So at this point, the whole top 15 basically more or less have the same score. Some of those are reference builds, like things that aren't really frameworks. They're just there to kind of do comparisons, like, a WebAssembly build or something, but which doesn't use framework concepts like declarative data. It's just literally vanilla, or a vanilla build, which is literally just like how you would hack together the most optimal JavaScript. But the important part there is everybody up at the front of that list is like neck and neck, to the point that when he does a run, they swap around. But that being said, the reactive approach that I've been working on and I've introduced into other libraries and people have pulled into their own libraries, does very well in table-based, list management type benchmarks like that one. So I think I looked a little while ago, but libraries using the same technique are basically make up almost. Recently I looked, I think it was like 70% of the top like 15 frameworks or top 10 frameworks on that benchmark. Admittedly, I wrote half of those libraries, like variations of MobX and Vue and stuff. But this approach in general is really performant for list management and that kind of stuff.
Because of more granular dependencies.
Yeah, although it takes, as I said, it takes a bit of both. The granular helps the updates, but more of the tests actually have to do with initial creation, and using techniques to either with pre-compilation or just kind of just creating like the optimal DOM nodes actually helps a lot with creation. That's why there are a few libraries up there that don't use the approach that are very, very fast, like Stage 0 or DOM-C. I'm just call them out. They're not as popular, but like they are using just a string template you could stick in your HTML. They don't use anything reactive, and they are very fast. The only reason why they aren't like right at the front 100% is because there is some tests that involve nested updates, and that's where a reactive system can edge out that kind of approach, because when you say update, if a row is selected or if, partial updates with reactive library, finer granularity, you can skip reconciling the whole list again. You only need to check the whole list if you sort the items in that. And in that test, there's actually only arguably one test that really pushes that, which is a simple row swap. So you don't actually get to see how good the list management is. But to me, that's a pass-fail test on that. And I'm getting a little bit too much in detail, but half the libraries in the benchmark solve it efficiently, and the other half don't, because it involves a lot more brute forcing in general to handle the common cases than algorithmic, and it's by that I mean it's like people write shortcuts in the reconciler for fast paths so that they are optimized, and that's really all the test is showing, is that that some libraries have written quicker ways to handle very specific situations. I'm not going to say they wrote them for the benchmark, just that it's much more common to say swap two items in a list than yeah, exactly. Like sure, there's like sort everything, and that does matter, but everyone knows that's a reasonably expensive operation, moving all the position. But like it's easy to optimize a common case like when you're in a file system or something where you like drag one file and move it, like that kind of single operation, which is most of what people can do with say a mouse case, can be optimized a lot more than the generic order everything. Anyway, I can go on into that for ages, because I spent so much time figuring out like the exact pieces. Not everyone knows this, but I also wrote the vanilla JS implementation, which is the fastest implementation. It helped me understand stuff by actually figuring out like how would you write the fastest possible implementation.
So you wrote vanilla JS and then I got back to the Solid, right? Exactly.
I started with Solid and then I just kept on going and then going, okay. Like sometimes the best way that test stuff is just prototype stuff, and I spent a lot of time on performance because I was like hell bent to show that reactive libraries were at first faster than React, but then faster than any virtual DOM library, and then you can tell Rich Harris and Svelte actually had a very similar thinking at the when he was working with Svelte. His old framework Reactive was also a reactive library, and it's from that time period where those libraries started kind of dying out a bit, and I think he was also looking for a way to get back in and find he like knew there had to be something out there, and he came up with Svelte, which is also a very performant library, and offers a slightly different philosophical approach, but offers a very nice environment to do this kind of automatic dependency tracked reactivity.
There was a point in time where he was like obsessed about performance, and every time someone would call him out or saying my framework is the fastest, he would come along and say, well, Svelte is faster. I just proved it, here's the benchmark, or something like that.
Yeah. The challenge there is Svelte never got faster than Inferno. and that was always one of those things that was less publicized and kind of always sidestep. There was Inferno, the virtual DOM library written by Dominic Gannaway, who's on the React core team now, is one of the fastest virtual DOM libraries. It's not actually. It's arguably there's another one that's known out there that's a bit faster, which is called Eevee, which is written by Boris Kahl, who is the author of the UI Bench framework. But those virtual DOM libraries are actually very fast, and every benchmark's different, but in most benchmarks, as to my knowledge, Svelte has never actually outperformed a virtual DOM library like Inferno, which is fine. But I mean, to be fair, people, when Reactivity kind of showed back up on the scene, Svelte being a big herald of that, people were thinking Reactivity was like the bottom of the barrel, like you couldn't even touch React, because of those early benchmarks and all that stuff. So Rich Harris showed that Reactivity was a contender, right near the front of the pack, and that you could do Reactivity performant. And I love his, as you said, I love his little cheeky kind of approach there, because it definitely got people paying attention, because it's a pretty bold claim to say that, because there's hundreds of different benchmarks, right, and different ways to test things. So to kind of come out there and call the shots is takes some guts. So I admire that a lot, because I think that really got people's attention on that, right? And it led me to make my own kind of personal kind of goal for myself, which I don't announce because I don't have as much guts. That in the same way he wanted to show that Svelte could be faster than React, pretty much anything or most virtual DOM libraries. I kind of made my own goal. Give me a benchmark with Svelte, I can do it fast with Solid. Yeah, you heard it here first.
Right.
You should highlight it, Lars.
Yeah. Well, I remember looking at the benchmark, and there was a person on the show saying Angular will always be the fastest framework, no matter how you put it. And Angular is barely a contender on that leading board.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one, because Angular is really performant in certain areas, and people don't realize that, because again, comes back to those benchmarks that were really popular in the 2014-15 time in the data snapshots. Angular can handle those better than reactive libraries can, but it was not standout. And Angular generally, for partial updates, does outperform most virtual DOM libraries. It has a lot of the same characteristics that a lot of reactive libraries do in terms of performance. The challenge with Angular has largely been that in a few places, and a lot of places where memory is important, it gets bogged down. And to be fair, in small tests and stuff, you're not going to see that. When you're trying to slam tens of thousands of rows on a screen, then Angular might not show up as nicely. But it's one of those things where the tests aren't always that realistic. Almost any of the front end frameworks are pretty performant. I mean, I like pushing stuff to the extreme. And that's kind of the zone I live in. But for small to medium apps, no one's going to be disappointed with pretty much any framework choice they take, I think, from a performance standpoint. For larger apps, it doesn't matter what framework you take. You're going to have to, weigh those trade-offs and think about how you manage that. Right?
You have different problems come before the different.
Exactly, right. So as much as I love the synthetic benchmarks, there's a certain reality of it there. It is true. In most of the benchmarks that I deal with, Angular does not particularly stand out. I think it's actually almost amazing that Angular, React, and Vue, and maybe it's not amazing, maybe it's very intentional, they almost always hover in the same space. Vue always makes sure that it's like a couple steps ahead of the others. But it's like they just decide if the performance is good enough by looking at each other, and then they're like, okay, well, we're in the same zone. We can move on and focus on something else important, like coming up with better features or working on something. So like their priorities in a different spot, obviously, and I think they keep enough of an eye on each other that if things slip out a little bit, they're like, okay, let's tighten that up on the next route.
Because it's still marketing, right? Because you have to have benefits over your contestants, so you just keep up with them.
It is interesting though, because of Svelte, I think, it kind of like calling the shot and now getting enough popularity that arguably it's slid into like the number 4 slot in an Ember can have a argument over who sits there per se after the big 3. Because it kind of slid into that, Vue's kind of perked its ears out, and with Vue 3 they were like, we are going to show more performance, and it is. Vue 3 has pulled Vue significantly ahead of the pack compared to React and Angular. So big kudos there. When large frameworks make claims like that, I usually expect to see like a 2 to 5% gain. Vue made the like 30% jump. Like legitimately, Vue 3 is a big step forward, not just on API and approach, but on performance. They've definitely looked at their system and decided, and to be fair, I would say it's similar to what React did with React 16 and React Fiber. It's like it's a fundamental architectural change that they've made that really promotes stuff. And on the other hand, from a reactivity standpoint, maybe something we can all be kind of celebrate is like Vue's reactivity, which has been there from day one. They've now pushed it up to the surface, which I couldn't be happier for, because like it's part of it's because Svelte's attention to reactivity, and then React Hooks having a similar signature, say, to reactive primitives, but it's never been easier to kind of develop in that sort of mental model. And Vue being one of the most popular libraries, and like finally, I say finally because I've been waiting for them to do this for years, but finally fully embrace the reactive model and pushing it out to the end user, I think is a really exciting time for reactivity.
Okay. Well, I remember reading about your story in one of your articles, and you were like, I think it was Vue that was your next big hope for reactivity, but then they kind of leaned a little back and like went a bit mainstream and appeasing the community.
Yeah, Vue, where Vue landed is a good place. It's just, I can't even picture being in that place where you have like the most popular library from like a GitHub standpoint, and maybe one of the, sure, not React in terms of downloads and usage, but one of the most popular JavaScript frameworks, and you have a lot of customers that have come to appreciate the story you've been telling, which is easy. You just configure this object, you just do this thing, and then you come in and you show them something which was actually always there and actually is what makes Vue so special, and they're like, it looks like React, and you're like, no. And that's sort of what happened, because they just got like this huge backlash over something that, like, from a framework developer's perspective, was like and a React programmer's developer app, the obvious choice, the way things had to go, and the things like I wish they'd done it years ago. They were probably a little. Vue always kind of tests the water. They are, if your library is based on easy, good developer experience, you don't want to rock the boat too much, because that first initial experience, what you see when you start up the framework for the first time, that's the most important. You don't want to lose people there. Vue gets everybody's converts, right? Like when people are like, oh, I'm tired of Angular. Oh, why is React like this? Vue, people like, I want a simpler thing. Svelte's been getting a bit recently, but Vue has always got those people. So you don't rock the boat. And
it's the sin garden of frameworks.
Yeah, and Evan has a great talk when he's talking about trade-offs. Like Vue makes sure that it's like right smack in the middle for every single kind of question you could have. When you don't want to make a decision, just use Vue because
Switzerland of frameworks.
yeah, kind of right. And this move kind of put them out there like we're having an opinion maybe a bit. I mean, they're still in the middle of things, but it was definitely like, the first time in a long time that people were actually starting to actually, go, oh, is Vue going to change being what it is? There's been a lot of fear of that. Angular has kind of now set this precedence because of the switch from Angular 1 to Angular 2, that people in the front end world had this huge fear, and that's what happened there. Vue, luckily, charmingly, I would say, like, got the community on their side, have a really good solution coming out with Vue 3. It was just, it became very obvious for me that the mechanisms involved in supporting a library that size and being able to like kind of move things forward wouldn't have really the room for me to do my experiments, right? And that's the whole thing. This stuff is still kind of on the experimental side. I haven't pushed to a major version with Solid yet. I'm in the minor versions. I've kind of stepped up from the the patch version, whatever. I'm pretty happy where things are. I'm getting very close to a major version, but this has been a long running experiment to kind of carve out this place. And a library like Vue, it's like it's the major leagues. Like it's just a different zone of priorities, and I realized pretty quickly that the speed at which they can move at and iterate at would reflect that. And I still think Vue it's kind of become, like, in my opinion, like the new knockout. If you want to just learn fine-grained automatic dependency reactivity, just pick up Vue. It's so easy, and you'll get a bit of that experience, kind of appreciate what that can mean for you, right?
You can drop it in, like, partially.
Yeah, exactly. And Solid, on the other hand, which is performance-oriented, which borrows a lot of functional programming ideas from React. The developer experience is much closer to React, and React is still a pretty easy framework for people to pick up, but I feel like it does require a certain kind of discipline, and I think I just think that difference does actually affect a little bit on that early stage, or that, like, it does actually affect people's perspective towards it. And I appreciate React for it, but not everyone's going to.
I want to just for a moment get back to Recks, and just to give people a feel about what it's like. Because you tweeted a screenshot of code, was it Recks or was it Rx elements for React, where you have you have an observable that's pulling some data, or data is being pushed into it, and you do an start with operator from Rx, and then you have like a loading component in JSX, right?
Oh yeah.
So you start with that loading component, and then if the data arrives, it will do render the list or whatever component, and if the observable fails, it'll show an error message or something like that. That's pretty freaking cool to me.
It's hard to explain that using the voice, but it's clear when you see that. Yeah, Brian?
Yeah. No, I follow what you're saying. Like, so Recks uses kind of a virtual DOM underneath to do the diffing. Is the idea? Your JSX elements are basically like your observables create virtual DOM, which then diffs, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. This.
Yeah, I think we have skipped the whole subject of virtual DOM versus templates, but please continue with your question. We'll get back to that, I think.
No, the reason I was wondering is, so you can basically, because of that ability, RxJS controls the flow, like in this example, right? Where you can go, here's at the end of the stream, here's one reality, and if there's an error, wherever the stream forks, you can basically present a different reality inside the component, and you can very directed see, like, here's three possible outcomes: loading, resolved, error, and so the end of the stream basically has can have the full sections of the template for all three.
Basically, you can switch between basic JS6 like divs, or you can have their components or big trees of elements. The idea there is, well, actually, every framework has an API to update some model, right? So update the data, react to that update, so to update the view. So and there are some error states, right? So all that is kind of built in RxJS ecosystem, and it's a lingua franca for a lot of developers, because Rx is one language that you can use for a lot of applications, right? So, and you can reuse those skills and the Rx libraries in a lot of projects, no matter what framework you have. The UI interactions, the server interactions, you can use Rx there, and it gives you a lot of options to define your ideas. And the approach with Recks was basically that you have a virtual DOM, and your stream, your component can have several parts, or whole component can be observable, and you just define granular where is the dynamic view. And basically the thing I love there is that the user, the developer, is in control of what parts are, how often they are updated, and how the errors are handled, and that is very granular. Yeah. So
does it have something like a store or some granular piece of state?
No. I thought to externalize that. So there are stores based on Rx, and you can just plug them in and use just different streams to input to your components.
Yeah, you can pick up almost any existing one.
Like Recall has their atoms, Svelte has its store, and RxJS has subjects and other pieces, and Solid has what you call signals. Is that right, Ryan?
Yeah, exactly. Just the whatever the primitive value is that is reactive. Yeah.
And maybe explain a little about that, how you're working with that when using Solid.
Oh, okay. Yeah. A signal, sure, it's very similar to an RxJS stream, just way. Well, actually, I was going to say way simpler, but there's actually it's a little bit different. It's like a RxJS behavior subject is the closest comparison for people familiar with that. But I don't. It's a lot simpler in that it doesn't really contain errors itself. It doesn't contain, am I done yet? It's basically just the next of an RxJS stream. So you, for automatic dependency tracking scenarios, you really just want to register reads so that when you write, you know what to update, right? Everything basically becomes a combine latest, essentially, like from an RxJS term. So it's just an automatic one. It's like if combine latest, you didn't have to stick the specific stream dependencies on. It just executes the function and then knows what triggers the combine latest, essentially. And so I started with RxJS, except I wasn't using like half of it. So I kept it interoperable, so it's very easy to convert from a string to RxJS. But essentially, a signal in Solid is just a very, very simple stream. And because you've inversed the control with this automatic dependency detection, it's less common to do transformations and operators, but you can. I actually made an Rx Solid library, or SolidRx library, as kind of a demo of how you could use the same kind of patterns there or integrate with RxJS stores. But the primitive was designed to be slimmed down, and the biggest difference, kind of like behavior subjects, is they store their value, and basically they are multicast and they're hot, using the terminology around the streams, basically that every signal can have multiple subscribers. So it's not like you create a producer for each stream. It essentially, each signal can be an origin of multiple like streams essentially, and they're hot in that they like things just get going right off the start. You're not like waiting for some kind of initialization, or they don't need to be hooked up in order to work. And that's the fundamental difference. I decided that those characteristics were really important for the way I want Solid to work, to allow expressions right in the JSX. And that's mostly why I diverged from the RxJS path, because I wasn't using half of it, and the few pieces I was using were kind of different. Interestingly, Cycle.js, if you've seen that library, also based on these observables, his observable library uses in there does have the full spec, like next, done, error, but he's also kind of André Stalz is also, or André Stalz rather, has also kind of played with this idea of hot observables as being like a preferable way to handle UI. So I don't. That's how I got a little out there, but that's just generally how to explain a signal to someone who's familiar with RxJS streams.
Well, for me, they like looking at them, they look like React hooks. So maybe you could explain how they're different from hooks.
Yeah. And that's the funniest thing, right? I talked about how I just like copied, kind of borrowed rather, other patterns in terms of API design and just used Reactivity to model them. It's actually kind of a bit funny. Knockout.js had these observables and computeds, and MobX has them too. And I was using a similar kind of pattern. And the problem with those, it's not a big problem, but you have the get and the set, and I never liked the API around it, because I liked the idea that the read and write was separate. It makes things very explicit, but I hated like tagging .get or .set. Knockout made it a single function. You could never tell if you're calling a function or if it's reactive. So I was already kind of working on these patterns, and with these kind of libraries, you generally group behaviors together. And it's true with RxJS too, right? You just define your sources of your stream, and you define your transformations, and you make these kind of composable behavior blocks. And Solid was already kind of working that way, but I still just kind of really detested part of the API and the inconsistencies. And then I saw Dan Abramoff's talk in 2018, the famous one where he introduces hooks. And well, most people are just like, oh, this is a really cool composition model. Like I just stopped thinking about React the second I saw them. I was just like, did he just do this? Did he just just show people? He did two things, right? He just showed people a model that looks almost identical to reactive libraries, like in terms of like the update flow. And secondly, he solved my problem, like the getter setter problem, right? Because by using those tuples, I never thought of it. I thought of objects and gets and sets and MobX. He basically came a way that you could just, not just him, React had come up with a way to just very simply name the getter and setter, and you can call them whatever you want, and they're short. You can make them one letter if you want. There's no extra dot value you tag on the end. Like with Vue or I considered all those variations except for that one, and I saw it and I was like, oh, tuples, done. And I instantly just updated. Like at that point, I updated. It did two things. I updated everything because then it just made sense for what I was looking for. And secondly, that's actually when I started pushing Solid and started writing the articles, because I immediately was like,
that's it.
It looks the same. People will actually be interested in this. I told you I've been working on this for years. It's kind of like my experiment, but I was like, people will actually not just look at it and go, what's these crazy things? Because hooks or the reactive primitives, there's always that kind of pushback when people see it, even with RxJS and streams. People you're used to writing code in this very imperative way. When you get started, you have your main function. Let's say I'm talking C land, but you essentially just write some code and it executes empirically, just down, and you just write some expressions, and it's really easy. When you get thrown into reactive world and everything's these function wrapped closures and all these streams, people are like, oh wow, that's complicated, or wow, that's magic. For React to come out and be like, this is how you program with React, I was just like, okay. People might actually listen to it. People were excited about the hooks announcement, so I was like, oh, this changes everything. And I think Vue, I'm sure Evan was watching that talk too. I mean, maybe he was already working on it, but I can't pretend that React hooks didn't influence every other library to finally like be okay to expose, maybe the reactive primitives and stuff. Like it was definitely a catalyst, and Solid might look like React, and there's a good reason for that. Part of it was under the kind of way React works, the naming that they chose was actually very apt in terms of describing how behavior works. So I use stuff like effect and create memo and stuff like similar kind of naming scheme. But the tuples, I said, brilliant solution for that problem. But the reason actually I feel is React hooks looks more like the old reactive libraries. So by just taking some of the more surface improvements that React has done, their team is very good at really understanding and doing experiments and understanding what people are looking for in a UI library. They end up just looking kind of the same, but they come from completely, I guess they kind of function very differently or come from different places, sort of.
Right.
It's not a coincidence, but it's also not like they're the same thing.
Well, we did need destructuring to arrive before being able to get that nice developer experience. Yeah,
definitely. And I mean, a lot of from a functional programming standpoint, it's like kind of obvious. You're dealing with tuples and stuff. It's like a common pattern. You just JavaScript didn't see that and as much. And the funny thing is, while the feature existed since like ES 2015 or whatever, I think maybe there were some limitations. And I was using CoffeeScript before, so I've been using them since 2010. Which is funny, but people weren't generally using JavaScript that way, and so much to the fact that when React hooks came out, Chrome did like almost like an emergency release. It wasn't an emergency release, but it was within a couple of weeks where they actually specifically optimized that case of destructuring arrays, because the previous approach was using iterators essentially. So like destructing an array would almost have to like iterate through the array, like the way you'd like iterate through a list. And they're like, oh no, we need to actually optimize this case because everyone's going to be using it with React hooks. So it just goes to show the kind of power of a decision by a framework like this and the way that it could impact the whole ecosystem.
Right. Okay, well, I did invite Rich Harris to this podcast, but he was, he wanted to take a break from podcast right now. He's been in a lot, busy man, but now the challenge is out there. As soon as he can prove with a benchmark that Svelte is faster than Solid, he can come back on this podcast. And I'm sure you'll come as well, Ryan.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I mean, as much as I rag on Svelte has changed the way people view front-end frameworks, and it is, as I said, very performant in its own right. In terms of frameworks that have over 10,000 stars or whatever the criteria is, Svelte is way ahead of the pack. I mentioned libraries like Inferno and stuff, which were obviously really performant, but for like what I'm considering kind of growing into consumer-based size, Svelte is super performant. It has a very consistent developer experience. Like he has like checked off all the boxes, right? And this library is amazing. I just obviously when you're the little guy on the fringes, and Rich Harris was sort of at one point too. It's really easy to call out the big people because they just don't dedicate the same time to those kind of aspects, right?
Well, now he has to. So there's that. Okay. Yeah. I want us to wrap up for the day, but first, Ryan, I'll give you a chance to plug anything. Shameless plug hours now.
Yeah. Could you tell us about the Marko.js as well in your plug?
Yeah, and that's I guess was the only plug that I could really. I was thinking about. I've talked a lot about Solid. Solid's still going strong, and it's my research hobby or whatever. But I got my day job at eBay here, and I moved and everything for this job. Marko.js is a library that's been around since like 2013, and it's been very good at certain things, but kind of off the radar for most people. And it's really it's where people are showing interest in more now than back in 2013. eBay had a problem, not a problem, but like that they couldn't solve. But they wanted to have the most performant e-commerce site. Like they needed things to load fast. Every second it means dollars, kind of thing, or millisecond or whatever.
Yeah.
And they were using, they have a large team, and they had some of Java platform, but they were trying to move everything to Node and consolidate on JavaScript, and they were using template engines like Pug or not actually Pug, but they had Dust to be specific, and they wanted to kind of offer more isomorphic experience where the JavaScript could also run on the client and it could unify, and that's where Marko came in. It was built there, and Marko is one of the fastest like in terms of isomorphic JavaScript libraries. It is the most performant SSR hydration library. I can say that confidently because it's not even close. JS framework benchmark, I talk about things being kind of close. This is not close. Libraries have improved their SSR the last couple of years because it's been a focus, but even then, Marko is several times more performant, and it's because they built their whole library with this use case in mind, and it's just completely different level for a front end framework that does SSR and client side, like the isomorphic. Yeah. And I even though it kind of not been much attention and maybe kind of fallen out a bit in the last couple of years, only a couple maintainers at eBay, they hired me. They're growing the team again, and I think that they're in a really good place to kind of put themselves out there in a world where people are looking for new approaches to server side rendering and service workers and kind of like hybrid isomorphic, trisomorphic rendering scenarios. When you have the fastest SSR solution, it's interesting. Marko, on the other hand, has never stood out partially on benchmarks because all of them are client side, except for the ones they wrote themselves. And Marko sits right there with React and Angular, just good enough, right? Yeah. And I think they were very interested by some of my articles and stuff, and they knew that they wanted to get a little more attention. They focused so much on performance on the server. They're like, well, let's over time at eBay, even the shift has definitely come to needing more client side stuff as well, right? Fundamentally, eBay is going to be, with an e-commerce site, going to be this multi-page fast renders, kind of scenario. But the developers are wanting to do more and more, interactivity, more widgets, more things that they can do on the UI. And it seemed like a perfect pairing because I admittedly did not know that much about SSR before kind of getting connected with these guys, and they'd been looking for solutions on how to improve their client side. So I basically joined the team and started this week. And the idea here is they're very interested in the reactivity. They want to see, because their whole thing is Marko is a compiler. It's a language. It's like its own syntax. They can output whatever makes sense. So we have the opportunity here to potentially make a very, very performant client-side framework and already have the most performant server-side library. So this has the ability to tell a really interesting story in terms of isomorphic JavaScript. I think there's a lot of work ahead and kind of updates, but Marko has a huge potential just because of the approach they've taken to the templating first kind of language thing to provide something that we haven't exactly seen, right? A lot of the client-side focused libraries, have focused very much on that part of the experience, and they add a lot of flexibility and dynamicism that gives you, certain types of control. But when they try and take that same stuff to the server, it's really hard, and it takes a lot of time. Ask React how long they've been trying to figure out suspense on SSR, and it's a challenging problem. Marko attacked it from the other side, where they've already solved that part, and they have in production scenarios that these other libraries are not only, and they've had it for 5 years, that these libraries are only trying now, like
progressive rehydration and all that.
Yeah, partial hydration and only shipping the components you need and stuff. They're still improving that, or we're still improving that. I only just started. I got used to the weird part. But in the future, the updating the client side is relatively easier by comparison because it's a much more, in a certain way, solved problem. Like client side, and because you're the closest to user, is never a solved problem because there's always new ways to interact, and there's always new ways that we can like improve the user experience. But from like the fundamentals, just to kind of get yourself out there, there's been lots of UI frameworks, lots of previous knowledge you can borrow from. So I think it's really exciting to kind of come from the complete opposite thing, something that started its life as a template language for super performant server rendering, and look at how you can make a fully fledged isomorphic experience. And as I said, they already have that. This is just taking it to the next level. And we're looking at bringing reactivity in there, in a compiler sense, similar to Solid, but maybe more similar to Svelte, to help you guys kind of understand where it's coming from, to kind of offer a best of both worlds kind of solution. I think that's really exciting, and I think people should keep an eye out for that.
Is it open source?
Yes, yeah, and that's a big thing. People, I skipped right over that. Marko.js is not only open source; it's actually owned by the OpenJS Foundation. Like eBay doesn't even own it, so this isn't. There's no concern about a few years ago about like licensing and React and stuff. No, like Marko is. eBay supports the team, and it's used internally on, I don't know the exact percent, but almost all eBay apps except maybe like the checkout, which is I think a React app, or the cart. But it is completely open source, like openly owned, everything. So you can go check it out and try it whenever, and you don't have to worry about like eBay clamping down on it. It's completely out there.
Sounds nice.
Yeah,
I would also recommend that people go to In-Depth. You joined the In-Depth platform this year, and you already put out like 3 articles.
Yeah, In-Depth's been great, honestly. It's hard sometimes to produce articles that have a lot of technical content in them and reach the right audience. And I've written a lot on Medium, which is good. You get good exposure, but you get a lot of just like click and drops kind of scenario. And In-Depth's platform that you guys are using for writing and stuff is great. Good code highlighting, all that. I used Dev2 as well in the past, but for my strong technical content, In-Depth is just the way to go for me. So I also suggest people should check that out.
Glad to hear that. Okay. And Cuz, what do you have for us today?
Yeah. First, Ryan, congratulations with new positions and the move. I'm sure you'll bring the best to Marko.
Thank you.
It's very great. I don't know actually what to plug. I would generally advise everyone to try some reactive programming. Give a look at RxJS and try it somewhere. If you feel limited with your framework, give a look at Recks and reactive elements. And I think no one actually knows exactly how the front end should be made, and that would be in a flux position, and new solutions would come up. For example, with Marko rendering on the back end, and a lot of new ideas out there. So keep your eyes open. Don't limit yourself to the top 3. Do your experiments on your free time, and take a look at Recks maybe. It's a good experience for reactive programming. Yeah.
Go look at the dog. There's a dog logo.
I thought it would resemble the name with a helper's dog, and it's also very friendly, so you can flex it. You can adopt it as much as you want. So yeah, that's it for me.
It's a good name for a dog as well, Recks.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much for coming, and
thank
we
you,
look
Lars.
forward to seeing you continue the work on Recks and Solid and Marko, this whole adventure.
Thank you,
It's
Lars.
all very exciting. Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.
Ryan, thank you. It was very interesting. Thank you.
The deep dive was brought to you by indepth.dev.